Translate this, and my monthly salary is yours, Victor Harrington laughed, raising his crystal glass so every rich guest in the ballroom could hear him. Amara Collins stood frozen beside the marble service table with a silver tray in her hands, wearing a plain black maid's uniform, soft, worn shoes, and an apron still marked with a faint smear of flour from the kitchen. Her left thumb had a small burn from a hot serving dish. Her cracked phone kept vibrating inside her apron pocket with hospital billing reminders she could not afford to answer. To everyone in that room, she was just the help. The quiet black maid who carried champagne lowered her eyes and disappeared when spoken down to. The guests laughed. No one stopped them. No one asked why Victor Harrington, a millionaire host standing beneath a chandelier worth more than most homes, needed to make a working woman into entertainment. On the marble table in front of him lay a manuscript he had purchased at a private Geneva auction for $512,000. It sat sealed under museum glass, covered in broken Latin, ancient Greek fragments, and strange merchant symbols that even Professor Adrian Vale, the scholar Victor had invited for prestige, had refused to translate without proper study. But Amara had glanced at it for 3 seconds, only 3, and Victor had seen her eyes change. That was why he turned the whole room against her. "Come on," Victor said, smiling like cruelty was charm. "Surely the maid can solve what the professor cannot." A few guests covered their mouths to hide their laughter. A man near the fireplace whispered, "This should be good." Clara Benson, the head housekeeper, went still near the service arch. Eleanor Harrington, Victor's elderly mother, lowered her teacup and watched Amara with sudden concern. Amara should have walked away. She almost did. But folded inside her apron pocket, beside that cracked phone, was a torn page from her father's old notebook. On it were symbols almost identical to the ones hiding beneath Victor's precious glass. Within 20 minutes, Victor Harrington would no longer be laughing. Within 20 minutes, the same guests who mocked the maid would be leaning forward in silence. And within 20 minutes, the millionaire who thought money could measure human worth would discover that the woman he humiliated was the only person in the ballroom who could read the secret buried inside his $500,000 trophy. But at 7:42 p.m., Victor still believed the manuscript belonged to him. That was the mistake. Harrington House stood behind 2 black iron gates on Kingsmere Road in Greenwich, Connecticut, where the lawns were trimmed like velvet and the windows glowed with the kind of warmth that never reached the service entrance. That evening, the mansion looked less like a home than a museum designed to praise one man. 3 valet lanes curved along the rain-dark driveway. Security staff checked names against a printed guest list clipped to a brass board. A temporary display team from Moreau and Klein Private Auctions had arrived at 4:10 p.m. to supervise the manuscript installation. At 5:35, the estate security system had activated camera 2 above the ballroom arch. At 6:30, the climate monitor beneath the glass case locked at 68 degrees. The document had rules. The workers had instructions. Victor had attention. Inside the ballroom, 39 guests moved through soft gold light, dressed in tailored tuxedos, silk gowns, diamond earrings, and watches that flashed whenever hands lifted champagne glasses. A string quartet played near the grand staircase. White roses floated in crystal bowls. The air smelled of polished oak, imported perfume, candle wax, and the sharp metallic chill of rain on expensive coats. Amara moved through all of it quietly. That was what Clara Benson had told the staff before the party began. Quiet steps, clear eyes, no reactions. Tonight is not dinner. Tonight is Mr. Harrington performing wealth. Everyone understood. When Victor Harrington performed wealth, somebody usually became the stage. He was 49, founder of Harrington Capital, a man praised in magazines for vision, discipline, and ruthless efficiency. People who wrote about him called him a builder. People who worked under him used different words when no one powerful was listening. Cold, proud, dangerous when bored. Victor did not collect rare objects because he loved history. He collected them because other people could not have them. Rare watches, rare wine, rare maps, rare books he never opened. And now, displayed in the center of his ballroom, beneath museum glass, was his newest prize. Lot 417B, the Belvedere custodial fragment. 15th century, possibly older. Purchased through Moreau & Klein private auctions. Sale price, $512,000. Temporary insurance binder, HK-417B-19. Display note, chain of custody review pending. Victor remembered the price. He ignored the warning. That mattered later. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor said, resting one hand near the glass case as if he had conquered the past itself. "What you see before you is not merely a manuscript. It is ownership of history." The guests murmured with admiration. Some admired the object. Most admired the price. Professor Adrian Vale stood beside the case, thin and gray-haired, wearing a brown velvet jacket and the patient expression of a man trying very hard not to dislike his host. He was a respected scholar of medieval trade language and ancient commercial codes. Victor had invited him because a professor made the party look serious. Scholarship gave vanity a frame. Victor turned to him. "Professor Vale has been examining the manuscript for nearly 8 minutes, he said. And apparently, scholarship moves at the speed of fog. The room laughed. Professor Vale did not. "This kind of text cannot be responsibly translated as a party trick, Mr. Harrington." Victor smiled. "Everything is a party trick if the audience is rich enough." The laughter grew louder. Professor Vale adjusted his glasses and looked down at the sealed page. "The visible line appears to imitate late medieval Latin, but the grammar is distorted. There are Greek abbreviations in the margins. The marks beneath the lower line may be commercial symbols, perhaps custody signs. If authentic, this could be more than a decorative manuscript. It may be legal, commercial, even tied to wartime provenance." Victor's smile thinned. Meaning, Professor Vale said, that before displaying it as a trophy, one should understand what it says. The ballroom cooled by one invisible degree. Victor raised his glass. "I paid over $500,000 for it. I do not need to know everything it says tonight." A guest near the fireplace laughed. "$500,000 buys patience." Victor turned toward him. "No, $500,000 buys possession. Patience is what people without funds call delay." The guests laughed again because Victor wanted them to. Amara entered with a tray of fresh champagne just as the laughter rose. She kept her chin slightly lowered, eyes on the narrow path between elbows, silk sleeves, polished shoes, and careless gestures. She had learned how to move through wealthy rooms without disturbing the fantasy that everything appeared by magic. A hand lifted, she offered a glass. A guest stepped backward without looking. She shifted. Someone said, "Careful," though she had not touched them. And she answered, "Of course, ma'am." She had been working at Harrington House for 6 months. Victor still rarely used her name. He called her girl when he wanted tea. You there when he wanted blame. The maid when guests were listening. Amara was not ashamed of the work. She cleaned carefully. She organized linen closets better than anyone before her. She knew the silver inventory codes, the library dusting schedule, the kitchen timing, the wine service routes, and which floorboards creaked outside Eleanor's bedroom. What hurt was not being a maid. What hurt was the way some people looked at a uniform and decided it contained a whole life. As she crossed the ballroom, her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. Once, then again. She did not check it. She already knew the number. St. Agnes Medical Center. Patient Billing Department. Her mother's rehabilitation balance had passed $8,700. Her brother Jamal's medication refill was due the next morning. Her bank account that morning, after rent and groceries, had shown $43.17. So she kept walking. Then she saw the manuscript. Her steps slowed, only slightly. The tray remained level. The champagne did not tremble. No guest noticed. But Victor did. He noticed because men like Victor were always watching for any expression from staff that did not look like obedience. Amara's eyes had moved to the page under glass, not with curiosity, with recognition. The marks at the lower edge of the manuscript were small, faded, almost hidden beneath the false Latin. But she had seen that structure before. The broken syntax meant to distract. The Greek fragments used like hinges. The merchant signs placed at line endings, disguised as decoration. Her thumb pressed against the tray. In her mind, she was no longer in Harrington House. She was 12 years old, sitting at a kitchen table under a yellow lamp, while her father, Samuel Collins, copied symbols from old auction catalogs and damaged archive photographs. "If you ever see this pattern, Amara," he had told her, tapping the paper gently with a pencil, "do not trust the language on top. Men who steal history often hide the truth in the margins." Now those margins were sealed beneath Victor Harrington's glass. Victor's voice cut through the memory. "Well," he said, bright and cruel, "our service staff seems fascinated." The room turned. Amara lowered her eyes. "My apologies, sir." No, Victor said. "Please, don't retreat now. You looked very interested." Clara Benson's posture stiffened near the service arch. Professor Vale looked at Amara more closely. Victor pointed toward the manuscript. "Tell me, do you understand this?" The trap was obvious. If she said no, they would laugh at her presumption. If she said yes, they would laugh at her arrogance. Amara felt the weight of the tray in her hand. Silver, glass, expectation, silence. She should have said no. Instead, quietly, she said, "Not all of it, sir." For half a second, the ballroom did not move. Then laughter burst across the room. "Not all of it," Victor repeated, delighted. "Wonderful." A man in a navy tuxedo leaned toward his wife and whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Maybe she reads wine labels, too." More laughter. Amara's face stayed calm. Inside, something folded inward. Victor turned toward Professor Vale. "You hear that, Professor? We may not need you after all. My maid has entered the field." Professor Vale's jaw tightened. "Mr. Harrington, that is unnecessary." "Unnecessary?" Victor said. "My dear Professor, unnecessary is what makes a good party." Eleanor Harrington, seated near the fireplace with a wool shawl around her shoulders, placed her teacup down. "Victor." It was only his name, but it carried warning. Victor ignored it. He had ignored softer warnings his whole life. "Tell us," he said to Amara, "where did you study unreadable manuscripts? The laundry room? The pantry?" Some guests laughed again, but not all. A few looked away. That was another kind of cruelty, the kind that sees harm clearly, then decides comfort is safer than objection. Amara looked down at the silver tray. Its polished surface reflected her face back in a curved blur. For 1 second, she saw another version of herself. 19 years old, standing in Columbia University's library with a scholarship letter in her hand, a stack of language books pressed against her chest. Her father beside her, wearing his only good suit, smiling as if every locked door in the world had finally opened. Then she saw the hospital bed, her mother's stroke, her father's funeral, Jamal's prescription bottles, the graduate admission letter she never answered. She felt the familiar desire to disappear, not because she was weak, because disappearing was sometimes how people survived rooms designed to crush them quietly. Victor reached toward the side table and lifted the high-resolution study copy prepared by Moreau and Klein. It was sealed inside a clear sleeve, stamped in red at the bottom. Study copy, Lot 417B. Chain of custody review pending, no direct marking. Professor Vale noticed the stamp. Mr. Harrington, that copy belongs to the review packet. Victor did not look at him. Then let us review it. He held the sleeve toward Amara. Go on. Show us what not all of it means. Amara did not take it. I should continue serving. Service can wait. Clara stepped forward. Mr. Harrington, dinner service begins at 7:50. Victor turned slowly. Clara, if I want the schedule recited, I will ask the clock. Clara stopped, her mouth closed. Amara saw the shame pass over the older woman's face. Clara was strict, even intimidating on ordinary days, but she was fair. She knew when Victor crossed lines. She had seen him do it before. But she also knew who signed the household contracts, who approved raises, who could end a job with one irritated phone call. So Clara lowered her eyes. My apologies, sir. Victor turned back to Amara. I will make it worth your while, he said. Translate a meaningful passage, and my monthly salary is yours. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed. Malcolm Price, a venture investor with silver hair and a watch that flashed under the chandelier, raised his glass. Victor, that might be dangerous. Your monthly salary could buy her apartment building. The room laughed harder. Amara heard the laughter as if through water. Her phone vibrated again. This time, the pressure of it against her hip felt like a hand pushing her forward. Victor leaned closer. Well? Or has the manuscript become less readable? Amara raised her eyes. Is that a formal offer? The laughter weakened. Victor blinked. What? You said if I translate a meaningful passage, your monthly salary is mine. Is that a formal offer, Mr. Harrington? Professor Vale looked at her with new interest. Eleanor's hand tightened around her cane. Victor's smile grew rigid. He had expected embarrassment. He had not expected precision. You want paperwork? I work in your house, Amara said softly. I know expensive people prefer records when money is involved. Silence. Not complete, but enough. Victor's jaw flexed. He could call it a joke. He could wave it away. But the room was watching now, and Victor Harrington would rather be cruel than appear cowardly. Clara, he said, not looking away from Amara, write it down. Clara picked up the event clipboard. At 7:46 p.m., under Private Dinner Incident Notes, she wrote, Verbal offer witnessed by attending guests. Victor A. Harrington promises 1 month of salary to Amara Collins if she translates a meaningful passage from study copy Lot 417B. Accuracy to be assessed by Professor Adrian Vale. Professor Vale stepped forward. I will verify only what can be responsibly verified. Victor spread one hand. Excellent. Responsibility has entered the room. He held out the study copy again. This time, Amara accepted it with both hands. That small gesture changed something. She did not take the sleeve like a servant accepting a burden. She took it like a scholar accepting evidence. Eleanor noticed. Professor Vale noticed. Clara noticed. Victor did not. Amara placed the sleeve carefully on the polished side table beside the glass case. "May I borrow a pencil?" she asked. Victor laughed under his breath. She needs tools. Professor Vale reached into his jacket pocket and offered her one. Of course. He did not toss it. He did not place it on the table. He handed it to her directly, respectfully. Amara felt the difference. She looked at the manuscript copy under the warm chandelier light. The amber glow blurred the lower marks. Could the display lamp be angled slightly left? Victor smiled. Now the lighting is wrong. Professor Vale moved before anyone else could. He adjusted the lamp. Cool white light spilled across the sleeve. The faded ink sharpened. Amara leaned closer. The ballroom quieted. She did not perform certainty. She did not close her eyes or pretend the page had become easy. She wrote 3 small notes on the back of an unused place card. False Latin. Terminal marks. Custody cipher. Professor Vale read the words upside down. His face changed. Victor saw that. What? The professor did not answer. Amara touched the pencil tip lightly near the first line, careful not to press the sleeve. The visible text is late medieval Latin, she said, but it is intentionally clumsy. Victor folded his arms. Meaning? Meaning the bad grammar is not a mistake. It is a curtain. A curtain, Malcolm Price repeated, amused. Amara ignored him. The first line appears to list household goods, silver vessels, devotional panels, private letters, 2 chests of ledgers. Victor spread his hands. So it is an inventory. No, Amara said. 1 word. Soft. Certain. The room stilled. She pointed to the marks at the end of the line. The real sentence continues here. These are not flourishes. They are merchant custody marks. Some resemble Genoese forms, some are older Mediterranean trade signs, but the pattern is hybrid. Professor Vale's voice dropped. Where did you learn this system? Amara paused. Her throat tightened around a life she had spent years not explaining. In an unfinished thesis. The words landed differently from the laughter. No one knew what to do with them. Victor recovered first. An unfinished thesis, he said. How dramatic. Amara could stop. She could return the sleeve. She could let him have his moment and leave the ballroom with the dignity of not feeding his cruelty. Then her fingers brushed the torn notebook page inside her apron pocket. Her father's handwriting. His patient lines. His belief that knowledge did not become worthless because the world refused to pay for it. When people laugh because they think you know nothing, Samuel Collins had once told her, do not argue with their laughter. Let what you know enter the room and sit down. Amara breathed in. Then she translated the first hidden phrase. Property concealed under temporary protection. Professor Vale went still, not impressed, alarmed. Amara continued. Inventory removed before winter seizure. Eleanor's hand tightened around her cane. Victor looked toward her. Mother? Eleanor did not answer. Her eyes were fixed on Amara. Amara moved to the second line. The lower marks were damaged. Someone had tried to scrape away part of the notation long ago. Not enough to erase it, enough to suggest fear. She read slowly. The goods named above remain under lawful claim of descent until restoration. The ballroom seemed to lose air. Professor Vale whispered, Good God. Victor set his glass down. What does that mean? Professor Vale stared at the page. It may be a concealed ownership record. Victor's face hardened. I bought a manuscript, not a lawsuit. Amara looked at the final cluster of marks. Her pulse changed. There it was. The broken branch sign. The split name structure. The same pattern her father had circled 3 times in his old notebook. Bellavere. Samuel Collins had written beneath it, possible family claim, lost collection, wartime seizure. Proof may exist in false inventory. Amara's hand trembled once. Victor saw it and mistook it for fear. "Well," he said, "have we reached the limit of the Maid's scholarship?" Eleanor stood, slowly. The entire room turned toward her. "Read the name," she said. Victor frowned. "Mother, sit down." Eleanor's voice shook. "Read it." Amara looked from Eleanor to the manuscript, then to Victor. The millionaire no longer looked amused. He looked irritated that control had begun moving away from him. Amara touched the final mark with the pencil tip. "The name hidden in the custody line is Bellavere." Eleanor's cane slipped from her hand. It struck the marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed beneath the chandelier. Everything froze. Victor's face went pale for the first time that evening. Professor Vale looked from Eleanor to the manuscript. Clara Benson stopped writing. The guests stopped smiling. And Amara Collins, still wearing her maid's uniform, realized the document Victor had bought to impress strangers might be the one her father had spent his life trying to find. Part 2. The Quiet Endurance. 9 hours before Eleanor Harrington's cane struck the marble floor, Amara Collins woke to the sound of her phone vibrating against a cracked windowsill. 5:18 a.m., Bridgeport, Connecticut. A one-bedroom apartment above a closed laundromat on Fulton Street, where the radiator hissed like it was tired of keeping poor people warm. For a few seconds, Amara did not move. She lay beneath a thin blanket, listening to the early traffic outside, the low rumble of a delivery truck, the pipe knocking behind the wall, and the soft, uneven breathing of her younger brother Jamal, sleeping on the couch in the next room. Then the phone buzzed again. She reached for it. The screen was cracked across the upper corner, splitting the notification into broken light. St. Agnes Medical Center, Patient Billing Department. Payment Plan Review, October 21st. Balance due, $8,740.63. Amara stared at the number until it stopped looking like money and started looking like a wall. She dismissed the notification, not because the bill disappeared, because she needed both hands to survive the morning. The apartment was small enough that every family problem had its own corner.
On the kitchen table were 3 prescription bottles, a folded school lunch form for Jamal, a stack of medical statements held down by a chipped mug, and a blue folder labeled Evelyn Collins, Rehabilitation Discharge Plan. Her mother had been at St. Agnes for 7 weeks after the stroke, 7 weeks of nurses, 7 weeks of forms, 7 weeks of Amara translating medical language into hope for a woman who had once braided her daughter's hair before church and now needed help gripping a spoon. Beside the bills lay an old Latin dictionary with tape around the spine. Beside that, an expired Columbia University student, ID, Amara Collins, Department of Linguistics, access valid through May 31st. The photo on the card showed a younger woman with brighter eyes, hair in loose curls, and a confidence Amara now barely recognized. Under the ID was a letter she never threw away. Though she had read it so many times, the folds had become weak. Columbia University Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Subject: Admission and Fellowship Offer, Historical Linguistics and Manuscript Studies. She had never accepted, not officially. She had opened the email at 2:13 a.m. beside her father's hospital bed, one hand over her mouth, tears falling onto the blanket. Samuel Collins had been awake enough to smile. "I told you," he whispered. "Languages know their own." 3 months later, he was gone. 4 months after that, her mother collapsed at work. 1 year later, Amara was cleaning houses during the day, filing medical forms at night, and learning that dreams do not die dramatically. They become postponed. Then postponed again. Then hidden so deep that strangers assume they never existed. Amara rose quietly from the mattress she kept in the corner of the bedroom and folded the blanket. She dressed in black slacks, a white undershirt, and the simple service uniform Clara required at Harrington House. She tied her hair back tightly, then checked the tiny burn on her thumb from the night before. The skin had blistered. She wrapped it with a bandage from the kitchen drawer. In the next room, Jamal stirred. He was 16, too thin for his height, with a face that still looked younger when he slept. His kidney treatments had made his energy unpredictable. Some mornings he joked. Some mornings he moved like every bone had been filled with wet sand. Today, he opened one eye. "You leaving already?" Amara poured water into the kettle. Event day. Rich people? Very. How rich? She glanced at the stack of bills. Rich enough to call $500,000 a conversation piece. Jamal sat up slowly, blanket around his shoulders. That should be illegal. It probably is in a moral country. He smiled a little. That was worth something. Amara made oatmeal, placed his morning pills beside the bowl, and wrote the schedule on a sticky note, even though he already knew it. 8 o'clock, meds, 12:30, lunch, 3:15, clinic shuttle, call Amara if dizzy. Jamal watched her write. "You know I'm not a baby." "I know. You write notes like I'm 5. "I write notes because I'm afraid." That silenced him. Honesty did that sometimes. He looked down at the oatmeal. You could still go back. Amara did not ask where. They both knew. Columbia, books, research, the life packed away in letters and old notebooks. She wiped the counter. "Eat before it gets cold. I'm serious." "So am I." He pushed the spoon through the oatmeal. Dad would hate this. Amara turned. The kettle clicked off behind her. Jamal's face softened immediately, regretful. "I don't mean the job. I mean you pretending you're done." Amara's throat tightened. "I'm not pretending. You are." She looked at him for a long moment. On the table, Samuel Collins smiled from an old photograph tucked beside the dictionary. He stood with Amara after her high school graduation, one hand on her shoulder, wearing a brown suit shiny at the elbows. Behind them was a banner that said, "Congratulations, graduates." In the photo, Amara held 2 certificates, and Samuel looked as if the whole world had finally admitted what he already knew. Her father had never had a university title. He had been a librarian at Belmore Public Library, a man who could repair a broken binding, calm an angry patron, and explain Roman trade routes to a child who came in asking for dinosaur books. He spent evenings copying strange marks from old auction catalogs and damaged archive scans, building theories no institution paid him to build. People called it a hobby. Samuel called it listening. "Dead languages are not dead," he used to say. "They are only waiting for someone patient enough to hear what the living forgot." Amara had believed him. Then life became louder than patience. She opened the kitchen drawer and took out a folded page, the one she sometimes carried when the day felt too heavy. It had been torn from Samuel's notebook years ago, after the funeral, when she could not bear to keep the whole thing open, but could not bear to close it either. On the page were symbols, merchant marks, custody signs, fragments of names. One name circled 3 times, Bellavere. Beneath it, her father had written, "Possible family claim, lost collection, wartime seizure. Proof may exist in false inventory." Amara touched the word with her thumb. Jamal saw the page. "Dad's code stuff." "Not code, maybe records." "Can you read it?" "Some of it." "Then why don't you do something with it?" She folded the page carefully. "Because research does not pay hospital bills." He looked away. That answer ended many conversations in their apartment. At 6:42 a.m., Amara left for the train. The sky over Bridgeport was pale and wet. The sidewalk smelled of rain, old leaves, and coffee from the bodega downstairs. She walked past the laundromat, past the bus stop, past a man sleeping under a blue tarp near the corner, and held her coat closed with one hand while the other protected the notebook page in her pocket. On the train to Greenwich, she stood because every seat was full. A man in a navy coat read financial news on his tablet. A woman in pearls complained into her phone about a delayed driver. Amara looked at her own reflection in the dark window and saw the uniform beneath her coat. She wondered, not for the first time, how many people on that train had a before hidden under what they wore. At 8:03 a.m., she arrived at Harrington House through the service gate. Not the front, never the front. The service entrance had a keypad, a metal awning, and a camera mounted above the door. The staff log sat on a narrow table beside the lockers. Name: Amara Collins. Arrival: 8:03 a.m. Assignment: Private Antiquities Dinner Supervisor. Clara Benson. Clara was already there, reading from a clipboard. She was in her late 50s, with silver hair pinned tightly and the posture of a woman who had survived rich families by mastering details. She frightened new staff. She corrected quietly. She rarely praised. But she was fair, and in Harrington House, fairness was not a small virtue. "You're early," Clara said. Train was kind. Do not trust kindness from public transportation. It never lasts. Amara almost smiled. Clara looked at her thumb. "Burn? Small. Kitchen kit has better bandages. I'll change it after setup." Clara studied her for half a second longer. She noticed more than she said. That was one reason Amara respected her. At 8:20, the staff meeting began in the service corridor. 6 servers, 2 kitchen assistants, 1 temporary bartender, 1 security liaison. Clara stood in front of them with the event sheet. "Tonight's dinner is private, but there will be press-adjacent guests, investors, and 1 academic consultant. The artifact display team arrives at 4:10.
Nobody touches the manuscript case except Moreau and Klein personnel or Mr. Reed, the handler. If Mr. Harrington asks for something outside protocol, find me." A young server named Lily asked, "What kind of artifact?" Clara checked the sheet. "Manuscript fragment, lot 417B. Purchase price $512,000. The temporary bartender whistled. Clara looked at him. He stopped. "The case is insured under binder HK-417B-19. Ballroom camera 2 will record continuously from 6:30, audio included." Amara looked up. "Audio included?" Clara saw the movement. "Something?" "No, ma'am," but Amara stored the detail away. She had learned to remember systems, cameras, schedules, signatures. People with money trusted paperwork until it told the truth about them. At 10:15, Amara was sent to the West Library. Her task was simple: dust the lower shelves, remove fingerprints from the glass cabinet, and make sure the French and Latin volumes on the display table looked impressive but not studied. Victor liked books arranged by color. Eleanor liked them arranged by author. Amara arranged them by author when Victor was not looking. The West Library was her favorite room in the mansion, not because it was beautiful, though it was. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, brass lamps, green leather chairs, a ladder on rails, rain tapping softly against tall windows. She liked it because the books seemed lonely, owned but unread. She ran a cloth along the spine of a French poetry collection and paused when she saw 2 volumes reversed. Victor had placed them wrong the previous week after showing a guest his Balzac shelf, which contained no Balzac in the section he pointed at. Amara corrected the order silently. Then she noticed a thin booklet on the side table. Moreau and Klein Private Auctions, Lot 417B, Preliminary Provenance Summary Access Copy, Harrington Acquisition Office. She should not have read it. She knew that. She also knew the booklet was open. The top page contained a short description. 15th century manuscript fragment, possibly from the Bellevere Custodial Archive. Acquired from private European family collection. Chain of custody gaps between 1939 to 1952. Further review advised. Bellevere. Amara's hand stopped. The room seemed to narrow around the word. She reached into her apron pocket and touched the folded notebook page. The same name. Her father's circled name. Before she could read more, a voice spoke behind her. Most people dust around papers without seeing them. Amara turned quickly.
Eleanor Harrington stood in the doorway, leaning on her cane. She was 81, thin, elegant, with white hair swept back and eyes that seemed older than the house. Unlike Victor, Eleanor looked directly at staff when she spoke. Not warmly always, but directly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrington," Amara said. "I wasn't trying to pry." "I know." Amara did not know what to say to that. Eleanor walked slowly into the library. "My son buys history as if it were furniture. He believes proximity is the same as understanding." Amara lowered her eyes. "That isn't for me to say." "No," Eleanor said, "but it may be for you to notice." Silence settled between them. Eleanor glanced at the booklet. Bellavere was my mother's family name. Amara looked up despite herself. Eleanor noticed. "You know it? My father mentioned it once. Was he a historian?" Amara hesitated. "He was a librarian." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Then perhaps he was more useful than a historian." The sentence startled Amara. It was the first time anyone in that house had spoken of a person like Samuel Collins as if his work could have mattered. Eleanor touched the edge of the booklet. "My mother used to say her family lost something during the war. A collection, papers, objects, proof. I grew up thinking it was grief turned into legend." She looked toward the rain-dark window. "Old families survive by telling stories about what was taken.
Rich families survive by pretending what they took was always theirs." Before Amara could answer, footsteps sounded in the hall. Victor entered without knocking. "Mother, there you are." He stopped when he saw Amara near the table. His eyes moved to the booklet, then to the corrected books, then to her face. "What are you doing?" Amara stepped back. "Dusting, sir." "Dusting does not require reading." Eleanor's voice was dry. "Neither does owning, apparently." Victor looked at her. "Please do not start." "Then do not give me reason." Victor turned back to Amara. "The library needs to be reset by noon, and make sure the staff understands tonight is not a village fair. We have important people coming." "Yes, sir." He looked at the books. "Did you move these?" Amara paused. "They were out of order." Victor's eyebrows rose. "And you would know?" She kept her voice even. "The volumes are numbered, sir." His smile was small and unpleasant. "Of course, numbers."
He walked to the shelf, pulled one book halfway out, then pushed it back crookedly. "Leave curation to people paid for taste." Amara said nothing. Eleanor's fingers tightened on her cane. Victor left as quickly as he had entered. When he was gone, Eleanor spoke softly. "Do not let my son teach you the wrong lesson about yourself." Amara looked at her. Eleanor's voice lowered. "Wealth can make people think they are taller. It cannot make them see farther." For the rest of the day, Amara carried that sentence like a match cupped in wind. At 4:10 p.m., Mr. Reed from Moreau and Klein arrived with the display team. At 5:35, security confirmed the case lock. At 6:30, camera 2 began recording. At 7:42, Victor saw Amara look at the manuscript. At 7:46, Clara wrote down his public offer. And at 7:58, Amara read the name Bellavere aloud in a ballroom full of people who had laughed at her. Now Eleanor's cane lay on the marble floor. The sound of it still seemed to echo. Victor stared at his mother. "Why did that name upset you?" Eleanor did not answer him. She was looking at Amara. "Read it again," she whispered. Amara's throat felt dry. "The name hidden in the custody line is Bellavere." Professor Vale stepped closer to the study copy. "May I see your notes?" Amara handed him the place card. He studied the 3 words she had written: false Latin, terminal marks, custody cipher. Then he looked at the manuscript again, and something like professional shock moved across his face. "She's right," he said quietly. Victor turned. "You cannot know that already." "I can know the structure," Professor Vale said, "and she saw it before I did." That sentence changed the room more than the translation had, because Professor Vale had no reason to flatter a maid, no reason to rescue Victor from embarrassment, No reason to invent brilliance where there was none. He was confirming it because the evidence forced him to. Victor's jaw tightened. Fine, she identified a name. No, Professor Vale said. She identified a concealed ownership clause. The guests began murmuring. Malcolm Price lowered his glass. A woman in emerald silk whispered, "Ownership?" Clara Benson stood frozen with the clipboard in her hand. And for the first time in 14 years of working for Harrington House, she looked at Victor and did not immediately lower her eyes. Amara noticed. Victor noticed too. That made him angrier. He turned toward Amara. "Continue then." His voice was no longer playful. It was sharp, threatened. "Since you have made yourself the evening scholar, let us hear the rest." Amara looked at the manuscript copy, then at Eleanor, then at the room full of people who had laughed before the first line was even read. She could still stop. A part of her wanted to, because the deeper she read, the harder it would be to return to invisibility. And invisibility, painful as it was, had kept her employed. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. Hospital billing. Reality calling from beneath the ballroom. She closed her hand gently around her father's folded notebook page. Then she picked up the pencil. And this time, when Amara Collins looked down at the ancient symbols, no one in the ballroom laughed. Part 3. The pressure escalates. Amara began again with the first line because she knew the room needed to hear it twice. Not for drama, for accuracy. The visible Latin is a false inventory, she said. It lists household goods, but the true meaning is carried in the marks at the end of each line. Professor Vale stood beside her now, no longer as a guest watching a curiosity, but as a scholar witnessing something he had nearly missed. Victor noticed that. He noticed the professor leaning toward Amara instead of toward him. He noticed the guest leaning toward the manuscript instead of toward his money. He noticed his mother standing with one hand pressed against the back of a chair, staring at the page as if a ghost had spoken her name. And he hated all of it. "Fine," Victor said. "Then translate it properly." Amara looked up. Properly would require magnification, spectral imaging, and comparison with known mercantile ledgers. Professor Vale nodded immediately. "She is correct." Victor's eyes hardened. "I was not asking you." The professor did not flinch. "But you should have been." The room went quiet. Victor turned his glass slowly in his hand. For a man like Victor Harrington, insult was easy when directed downward. It became something else when returned by someone the room respected. He could crush a waiter with a sentence. He could freeze a housekeeper with a glance. But a professor, a guest, and an invited authority made cruelty more difficult to disguise as wit. So Victor smiled again. That was more dangerous. "By all means," he said. "Let the maid and the professor educate us." Amara heard the word maid, not as a job, as a weapon. She kept reading. The second hidden phrase says, "Inventory removed before winter seizure, under temporary protection."
Eleanor closed her eyes. "My grandfather used those words," she whispered. Victor looked at her sharply. "What words?" "Winter seizure." She opened her eyes, and for a moment she did not look like Victor's mother. She looked like a daughter remembering her own mother's grief. "When I was young, my mother said the Bellavere collection disappeared during the winter seizure. She said the family trusted someone to move it before the house was searched, but it never came back." Malcolm Price gave a low whistle. "Sounds like a lawsuit wrapped in parchment." Victor snapped. "It sounds like family mythology." Eleanor turned to him. "My mother was not mythology." That stopped him for 1 second, only one. Then he recovered. "Mother, wealthy European families lose paintings, silver, and stories every generation. They all believe something was taken. That does not make every scrap of paper a legal miracle." Amara looked at the manuscript again. "The third line is clearer." Professor Vale bent closer. "Read it," Amara translated slowly. "The goods named above remain under lawful claim of Bellavere descent until restoration." The word restoration moved through the room like a match flame. A woman in emerald silk touched her necklace. One of Victor's investors took out his phone, then thought better of it when he saw the security camera above the arch. Clara Benson wrote faster on the event clipboard. Victor noticed her hand moving. Clara. She froze. What are you writing? The translation has spoken, sir. Why? Because you asked me to record the offer? I did not ask for minutes of a trial. Clara's face tightened, but she did not lower the clipboard. No, sir. That tiny refusal was not loud. It did not need to be. Victor stared at her. Clara had served Harrington House for 14 years. She had endured his moods, covered staff shortages, protected workers from the worst of his temper when she could, and stayed silent too often when she could not. She knew the cost of speaking in that room. But now the camera was recording. The professor was listening. Eleanor was standing. Amara was reading. And silence, for the first time, felt more dangerous than speech. Victor's gaze moved from Clara to the red light above the ballroom arch. Camera 2. He remembered it then. The display protocol. Continuous audio-video recording, installed to protect his manuscript, now preserving his humiliation. His jaw tightened. Professor Vale turned to Amara. Is there a name attached to the custodian? Amara studied the fourth line. This one was badly damaged. The visible Latin referred to stewardship, but the hidden marks at the end told a different story. 3 symbols repeated. One was a split branch. Another resembled an old harbor mark. The final symbol looked like a merchant's tally, but carried a personal indicator. I need the light lower, she said. Victor laughed coldly. Of course you do. Professor Vale adjusted the lamp without asking Victor. The gesture landed like a verdict. Amara leaned closer. There is a custodian name, but it is fragmented. M. Moreau, possibly Matteo Moreau or a Moreau household line. Mr. Reed, the Moreau and Klein handler standing near the glass case, went pale. Professor Vale looked at him. Moreau? Mr. Reed swallowed. The selling family name was Moreau. Victor turned on him. You said the provenance was acceptable. I said the preliminary chain was incomplete but marketable pending review. That means acceptable. No, sir, Mr. Reed said quietly. It means not yet disproven. The room shifted again. Victor's confidence flickered. Only for a second, but Amara saw it. She also saw something else, Mr. Reed's fear. The young handler was not powerful. He was there to supervise the object, not challenge the buyer. But his name was on the condition report. If this manuscript became a provenance dispute, his silence would become part of the record. Amara read the next phrase. Temporary protection by Moreau household. No sale permitted. No transfer of ownership permitted. Return to Bellevue bloodline upon danger's end. Eleanor gripped the chair. My mother said there was a trustee. Victor's voice sharpened. And yet no one found proof in 80 years. Professor Vale answered before Eleanor could. Because proof hidden in a custody cipher is useless until someone recognizes the system. Victor looked at Amara. And she just happens to recognize it? Amara met his eyes. Yes. The answer was quiet. It struck harder because it did not apologize. Victor stepped closer. How convenient. Professor Vale's voice turned cold. Mr. Harrington, you challenged her publicly because you were certain she could not answer. Now that she can, you cannot call the answer convenient. A few guests murmured. Victor looked around the room. He had invited these people to witness his power. Instead, they were witnessing the loss of it. So he changed tactics. This is absurd, he said. A maid glances at a page, writes 3 dramatic notes, and now we are discussing stolen collections, legal heirs, and my mother's childhood stories? This is how fraud begins. Someone sees a wealthy room and invents meaning. Amara's hand went still. Fraud. There it was. Not stupidity anymore. Not comedy. Accusation. Professor Vale looked furious. Eleanor whispered, "Victor." But Victor continued, "I have built companies for 25 years. I know performance when I see it." Amara looked down at her uniform, then at the manuscript, then at the guests. She felt, for one dangerous moment, the old urge to vanish. It would be easy to stop, to say she had only translated what she could, to return the pencil, to let Professor Vale handle the rest. The hospital bill buzzed in her pocket again. Rent was due in 12 days. Jamal needed medication. Her mother needed a new discharge plan. She could not afford to become the employee who embarrassed Victor Harrington in front of investors. Her hand tightened around the pencil. Then she felt the folded notebook page against her apron, her father's handwriting. Samuel Collins, who had sent letters to scholars who rarely replied. Samuel Collins, who had worked in a public library and still believed truth belonged to anyone patient enough to seek it. She heard his voice. "When a room asks you to shrink, Amara, do not become loud, become exact." So she became exact. "Mr. Harrington," she said, "fraud would be claiming certainty without evidence. I'm giving a preliminary reading, identifying the structure, separating visible text from hidden notation, and stating where verification is required." Professor Vale looked at her with something close to admiration. Amara continued, "If you want this dismissed, proper procedure would be simple. Preserve the artifact, suspend private display, contact the auction house, request a provenance review, compare the cipher against known merchant ledgers, and have a neutral institution examine the ink layers." The room was silent. Victor's face darkened. "You speak as if you are counsel." "No," Amara said. "I speak as someone who has read review protocols while dusting your library." A quiet shock moved through the guests. Eleanor looked at her. Clara's pen stopped. Victor's expression shifted from anger to something more exposed. "You read documents left in private rooms?" Amara held his gaze. "I read titles, labels, notes, and instructions. That is different from understanding nothing." Professor Vale turned to Mr. Reed. "Was there a review warning?" Mr. Reed hesitated. Victor snapped, "Reed!" The handler looked at the glass case, then at camera 2, then at Eleanor. "Yes," he said. Victor went still. Mr. Reed swallowed. The acquisition packet noted chain of custody gaps from 1939 to 1952. Moreau and Klein recommended independent review before public claim or display. Eleanor's face went white. "Victor, you knew that?" "It was routine." Amara looked at the red stamp at the bottom of the study copy. Chain of custody review pending. She pointed to it. "It is printed here." No one laughed. The stamp had been visible the whole time. Victor had missed it because warnings were for people who thought ownership required responsibility. Professor Vale asked, "Was there a case reference?" Mr. Reed answered softly, MK-417B-PROV. Clara wrote it down. Victor turned toward her again. "Clara, stop writing." This time, Clara did not. Everything froze. It was a small rebellion, a pen moving across paper. But in Harrington House, where staff survived by anticipating Victor's anger, it sounded almost like thunder. Clara looked up. "With respect, sir, the artifact protocol requires an incident note if provenance concerns arise during display." Victor's voice lowered. "You work for me." "Yes, sir," Clara said. "And tonight, I am doing my job." Eleanor stared at Clara. Then she slowly nodded. That nod mattered. It gave Clara enough protection to keep breathing. Victor saw it and said nothing. Amara returned to the manuscript. There was one more line visible in the lower margin, almost erased. It curved beneath the final Latin phrase in a hand different from the rest. Later, perhaps. A witness notation. Not part of the original inventory, but tied to its movement. Her mouth went dry. Professor Vale noticed. "What is it?" "I'm not sure." Victor laughed without humor. At last. Amara ignored him. She angled the sleeve slightly under the lamp. The marks aligned. Her father's notebook had described this method. Split the witness name into end symbols. Read every third terminal mark. Ignore the surface script. The truth was not in the sentence. It was in the pattern. She copied the marks onto the place card. Bellavere. Then below it, another name. Not Moreau, not Bellavere. A witness. L. Harrington. Amara stopped. Professor Vale leaned in. His eyes narrowed. "What did you see?" She did not answer immediately. Victor's family name had just appeared inside a hidden custody record tied to Eleanor's lost family collection. That was no longer embarrassing. That was dangerous. Victor sensed it. "What?" he demanded. Amara looked at Eleanor first. The old woman looked as if she already knew the blow was coming. Amara spoke carefully. "There is a witness notation beneath the custody clause," Professor Vale asked. "Name?" Amara looked down once more, hoping she had misread it. She had not. "The witness appears to be L. Harrington." The room went completely still. Victor's lips parted. Eleanor gripped the chair so hard her knuckles whitened. Malcolm Price whispered, "Harrington?" Professor Vale straightened slowly. "Mr. Harrington," he said, "was there a Leonard Harrington in your family?" Victor did not answer. Eleanor did. Her voice was barely audible. "Leonard Harrington was Victor's grandfather." The chandelier hummed faintly above them. Rain tapped against the tall windows. Amara looked at the manuscript, then at Victor, then at the hidden name that had crossed generations to arrive in his ballroom. Victor whispered, "Stop reading." But it was too late. She had already seen the next line. Part 4. The Reveal and Authority Shift. Victor Harrington's order hung in the ballroom like a hand over a flame. Stop reading. For the first time that evening, he did not sound amused. He did not sound bored. He did not sound like a millionaire entertaining guests with a servant's embarrassment. He sounded afraid, and everyone heard it. Amara kept her eyes on the study copy, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the archival sleeve, the pencil still hovering above the place card where she had written the hidden names. Bellavere, Moreau, L. Harrington. 3 names that should not have been connected. 3 names that had been hidden beneath broken Latin and old merchant marks for generations. Professor Adrian Vale stood beside her, his face pale with academic shock. Eleanor Harrington looked as though age had rushed through her all at once. The old woman still held the back of the chair, but her eyes were fixed on Victor, not the manuscript. "Why would Leonard's name be there?" she asked. Victor's jaw tightened. Because she misread it. The answer came too quickly. Professor Vale looked down at the copied notation. "No." Victor turned on him. "No?" "No," Professor Vale said. "The mark is consistent with an abbreviated witness signature. I cannot certify the full passage without proper imaging, but the letter sequence she identified is plausible. Very plausible." Victor's face hardened. Plausible is not proof. Agreed, Amara said. The room turned to her. She was not defending herself dramatically. She was not chasing victory. She was stating a boundary. It is not proof yet. It is evidence that requires preservation and review. Professor Vale nodded. Exactly. Victor stared at them both. That was the unbearable part for him. They were not acting like entertainers. They were acting like professionals. And he was not the center of the room anymore. Eleanor's voice trembled. Leonard Harrington married into my mother's circle after the war. My mother always said he knew more about the lost Bellavere collection than he admitted. Victor turned. Mother, this is not the time. No, Eleanor said, her voice suddenly sharper. This is precisely the time. A long silence followed. The guests did not move. The string quartet, which had stopped playing minutes earlier, stood near the staircase with instruments lowered. The violinist held her bow in one hand, frozen between service and witness. Malcolm Price's champagne glass remained untouched. A journalist invited to cover Victor's private stewardship of rare culture, Dana Pierce, had stopped pretending she was only a guest. Her notebook was open. Victor noticed her pen moving. This is off the record, he snapped. Dana looked up. You invited me to write about the manuscript. I invited you to write about the acquisition. And now I am watching the acquisition become meaningful. The room tightened again. Victor's face darkened. Professor Vale stepped toward the glass case. Mr. Reed, the original should remain sealed. No one should remove it from the ballroom until a preservation note is entered and the auction house is notified. Mr. Reed swallowed. I agree. Victor turned toward him. You agree? Mr. Reed was young, maybe 30, with the anxious discipline of a man whose job required him to appear calm around people who could ruin him with one complaint. He had been standing beside the case all evening, hands folded, speaking only when necessary. Now every eye found him. He looked at Victor, then at camera 2 above the ballroom arch, then at Eleanor Harrington. The display protocol requires escalation if a title or provenance concern emerges during public presentation, he said quietly, especially if the concern relates to wartime transfer or contested ownership. Victor's voice dropped. Read your contract carefully before you choose your side. Mr. Reed's face flushed. I did read it, sir. That answer landed harder than expected, because Victor had not. Mr. Reed opened the black folder he had been carrying since arrival and removed a printed document with a Moreau and Klein header. Clause 9D, he said, his voice shaking but clear. If credible provenance concerns arise during temporary display, the possessor must suspend promotional claim, preserve the item in current condition, and notify Moreau and Klein's provenance department within 48 hours. Failure to do so may void portions of the acquisition warranty. Professor Vale looked at Victor. You were informed. Victor said nothing. Eleanor whispered, Victor. His silence answered too much. Clara Benson continued writing. This time, Victor did not tell her to stop, because now Clara's clipboard was not the only record. There was the camera, the professor, the handler, the journalist, the guests, and the maid he had mocked, standing beside the $500,000 manuscript with the only clear reading in the room. Victor reached for his phone. It buzzed before he touched it. A notification lit the screen. Moreau and Klein Private Auctions. Subject, Urgent. Lot 417B/Provenance Inquiry, Update. Dana Pierce saw it. So did Clara. So did Eleanor. Victor quickly turned the screen downward. Professor Vale's eyes narrowed. Mr. Harrington, has the auction house contacted you about this item tonight? Victor gave a thin smile. This is not a deposition. No, Eleanor said. It is my house. Victor looked at her. The words surprised even him. Eleanor stood straighter. For decades, I allowed this family's history to be kept in locked rooms because men called it fragile, emotional, old grief. I listened when lawyers said there was no evidence.
I listened when your father told me not to embarrass the Harrington name. I listened when you told me the Bellavere story was romantic nonsense. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. Tonight, the first person in this house to read what may be evidence is the woman you humiliated in front of your guests. Victor's face tightened. Mother, you are being manipulated. Eleanor's eyes filled. By whom? The maid who tried to walk away? No one spoke. That silence belonged to Amara now, not because she demanded it, because the truth had placed itself beside her. Professor Vale turned to Amara. Miss Collins, I need to ask formally, where did you study? Amara's hand closed around the pencil. This was the part she hated. Not because she was ashamed, because explaining a broken dream in front of wealthy strangers felt like letting them inspect the wound after laughing at the limp. I studied linguistics, she said. Where? She looked down. Columbia. A ripple moved through the room. Victor's eyes narrowed. Columbia University. Amara looked at him. Yes. What, night classes? Eleanor's face hardened. Victor. Professor Vale's voice was low. What program? Historical linguistics and manuscript studies, undergraduate concentration. I was admitted to graduate study, but I withdrew before beginning. Professor Vale stared at her. Who was your advisor? Dr. Lena Moritz. The professor inhaled. Lena Moritz does not take weak students. Amara did not answer. He continued. What was your thesis? She looked back at the manuscript. Hybrid mercantile ciphers used to conceal custodial ownership records during confiscations and wartime transfers. The room went still. Even Victor understood the precision of that answer. This was not luck. This was not a maid guessing. This was a woman whose unfinished academic work had led directly to the manuscript he had purchased without reading. Professor Vale removed his glasses. My God. Victor spoke quickly. Convenient again. Amara looked at him. No. Expensive. The word cut through the room. Victor frowned. Amara continued. It cost me my scholarship when I could not return. It cost my father years of unpaid research because no institution took him seriously. It cost my mother her care when bills came faster than grants. It cost my brother medications we had to split across weeks. Nothing about this was convenient. The ballroom was silent. Not polite silence, ashamed silence. The kind that arrives when people realize the person they mocked did not rise from nowhere. She had been carrying a whole life while they reduced her to a uniform. Professor Vale's expression changed. Your father researched this? Amara hesitated. Yes. What was his name? She looked at him carefully. Samuel Collins. The pencil slipped slightly in Professor Vale's hand. He stared at her. For a moment, no one understood why the name mattered. Then he whispered, Samuel Collins from Belmore Public Library? Amara's lips parted. You knew him? I knew his letters. Her breath caught. Professor Vale reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone with unsteady hands. I kept archived correspondence from independent researchers. Most people sent fantasies. Your father did not. He typed quickly. The room watched him search. Samuel Collins Bellavere. Custody marks. A result appeared. Professor Vale opened an email.
His voice, when he read, had changed completely. Subject: Possible Bellevere Custodial Cipher Pattern. From Samuel Collins, dated March 12, 2013. Amara's face went still. March 12th. She remembered that date. Her father had mailed 3 letters that morning before a hospital appointment and bought her a cinnamon roll from the station bakery because he believed bad news should never arrive on an empty stomach. Professor Vale opened the attachment. A scanned notebook page filled the screen. At the bottom was the same broken branch sign, the same terminal marks, the same circled word. Bellevere. Professor Vale turned the phone toward Amara.
Your father identified the structure. Amara covered her mouth. Not dramatically, not for the room. Because if she did not, something inside her might break open too loudly. For years, Samuel Collins had been described politely as a curious librarian, a self-taught man with niche interests, a kind father who loved old books. People had praised his passion in the careful tone reserved for work they did not consider important. But here, under Victor Harrington's chandelier, a respected professor was saying the truth her father chased was real. Professor Vale's voice softened. He wrote that if the Bellevere name appeared inside a custody cipher, it could indicate concealed proof of ownership. I told him the theory was promising. Then he stopped. Amara looked at him. Then? He swallowed. Then I became busy. The sentence fell like a confession. I had conferences, committee reviews, publication deadlines. I replied twice. Then I let the correspondence fade. Amara's eyes shone. He died thinking no one believed him. Professor Vale closed his eyes. I am sorry. There was no performance in the apology. That made it heavier. Victor shifted uncomfortably. He did not like grief that did not involve him. He did not like rooms where another man's failure sounded nobler than his success. So now, Victor said, we are expected to accept the maid's father as the missing authority? Eleanor turned toward him slowly. Say her name. Victor looked at her. What? Say her name. He said nothing. Eleanor's voice hardened. Her name is Amara Collins. The room felt the correction. Amara felt it too. Small, late, but real. Victor looked away first. Professor Vale turned back to the manuscript copy. Miss Collins, may I compare your father's marks with the line you identified? Amara nodded. Together, they laid the place card beside the phone screen and the study copy. Professor Vale did not touch the sleeve without permission from Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed stepped forward, documented the comparison with his inspection tablet, and logged the time. 8:11 p.m. Preliminary comparison requested by Professor Adrian Vale. Study copy only. Original remains sealed. Observed by handler, estate staff, invited guests. Clara wrote the same time on her clipboard. Victor watched systems assemble around the truth. He hated systems when he did not control them. Professor Vale pointed to the old scan. See here? Your father suspected the third terminal symbol represented descent claim rather than location. That was unusual. Most scholars would read it as a harbor marker. Amara leaned closer. He wrote that because the symbol repeats after names, not places. Yes, Professor Vale said. And the same pattern appears here. He looked up. Miss Collins, your reading is not only plausible, it is supported by prior independent research. The room absorbed the sentence. Victor's challenge had become formal verification. The maid's translation had become evidence. Her father's notebook had become source material, and Victor's laughter had become part of the record. Malcolm Price cleared his throat. Well, he said awkwardly, Victor did make an offer.
Victor looked at him sharply. Malcolm lifted both hands. "I'm only saying we all heard it." Dana Pierce added, "And it was recorded." Victor's eyes moved to camera 2. Red light, blinking. Clara looked down at her notes. Verbal offer documented at 7:46 p.m. Verification by Professor Vale now supports meaningful translation. Professor Vale said, "Yes." Victor's mouth tightened. It was a joke. Eleanor's voice cut through him. "No." One word. Everything stopped. She walked slowly toward her son, each step measured, her cane now back in her hand. "A respectable man does not use money to humiliate a woman, then call it a joke when she proves more educated than he is." Victor's face flushed. "That is not fair." "No," Eleanor said. "What happened to Miss Collins was not fair. What is happening to you is consequence."
The room went silent. Victor looked around, searching for someone to rescue him with laughter. No one did. Professor Vale spoke quietly. "Mr. Harrington, you should honor the offer." Victor's jaw flexed. "How exactly do you propose calculating 1 month of salary?" Clara looked down at the event folder. Harrington Capital's public executive compensation filing lists annual base salary at $960,000, excluding bonuses and equity. Victor's head snapped toward her. Clara did not flinch. "That equals $80,000 per month before taxes." A soft shock moved through the guests, not because of the amount, because Clara had known where to find it. Victor stared at her. "You searched my compensation?" "It was in the public profile sent to staff for tonight's press briefing," Clara said. "Your office included it." The room shifted again. Victor's own vanity had supplied the number. That was almost poetic. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook with stiff, angry movements. Amara stepped back. "No." Victor looked up. "No? I will not accept money thrown at me as payment for a joke." Victor's face tightened. "You asked if it was formal." "Yes," Amara said. "And now I am asking that it be treated as work." Professor Vale nodded slowly. Amara continued. "If you are paying me, the memo line should say professional translation fee. Not prize, not gift, not charity, not entertainment." Eleanor's eyes filled again. Victor stared at Amara as if seeing her for the first time and resenting the clarity. Then he bent over the marble table and wrote, "Pay to the order of Amara Collins. Amount $80,000. Memo, professional translation fee. Lot 417B, preliminary reading." His hand pressed so hard the pen scratched the paper. He tore the check free. The sound was sharp. For a moment, Amara did not take it. Then Clara stepped forward and quietly placed one of the silver service trays between them. Victor set the check on the tray. Clara held the tray toward Amara. It was a small act of dignity, a barrier between insult and payment. Amara picked up the check with steady fingers. She did not smile. She did not thank him. Because payment was not generosity when it followed a debt. Professor Vale looked at the manuscript again. "This cannot remain a private display." Victor barked a laugh. "It is mine." Eleanor turned. "No." Victor went still. She looked older now, but not weaker. The manuscript was purchased through the Harrington Family Trust Acquisitions account, not your personal art fund. "I am a trustee. Until provenance review is complete, this object will be removed from private display and transferred to independent conservation custody." Victor's face went white. "You would take it from me?" "I would take it from vanity," Eleanor said. Mr. Reed opened his tablet. "Moreau and Klein can arrange secure transfer to the New Haven Center for Manuscript Conservation by tomorrow morning." Professor Vale added,
I can contact Dr. Lena Moritz and the Columbia Manuscript Lab for independent review. Amara's breath caught at Dr. Moritz's name, her old advisor, her unfinished life. Professor Vale noticed. You should be part of that review, he said. Victor snapped, absolutely not. Eleanor looked at him. Why? She is staff. She is qualified. She is a maid. This time, the word did not land on Amara. It landed on Victor. The room heard it, the contempt, the panic, the desperate need to put her back in the place where his world made sense. Amara lifted her head. Yes, she said. I am a maid. I have cleaned your library, served your guests, polished your silver, and corrected books you bought but never opened. Victor said nothing. She continued. But the work I do here does not erase the work I did before. It does not erase what I learned. It does not erase my father. It does not erase the fact that I read the manuscript because I respected it before you did. The ballroom held its breath. Eleanor turned to Mr. Reed. Record that Miss Collins is to be invited as lead preliminary translator for the independent review. Mr. Reed nodded. Yes, Mrs. Harrington. Professor Vale said, I support that. Clara wrote it down. Victor looked at the three of them, his mother, the professor, the handler, and understood that authority had moved without asking his permission. Then his phone buzzed again. This time he did not hide it fast enough. Dana Pierce saw the subject line. Moreau and Klein, Provenance Department. Subject, Urgent, Lot 417B, Linked Inquiry, Bellavere Claim Registry. Eleanor saw the word Bellavere. Her face changed. Victor, she said slowly, when did you receive the first inquiry? Victor looked toward the window. Earlier today. The room went cold. Professor Vale stared at him. Before the party? Victor said nothing. That silence was enough. Eleanor's voice broke. You knew there might be a Bellavere claim before you displayed it tonight? It was unverified. And you still mocked the only person who could read it? Victor had no answer. The man who had spent the evening turning others into spectacle now stood inside the one spectacle money could not control. A truth with witnesses, a record with timestamps, a mother whose grief had become evidence, a maid whose name he finally had to know. Amara looked at the manuscript again. The final lower notation was still there, faint beneath the Harrington witness mark. She had not read it aloud yet. Professor Vale followed her gaze. There is more? Amara nodded slowly. Victor whispered, No. But this time, nobody obeyed him. Amara bent toward the page. The last symbols were nearly erased, but under the cool light, they aligned just enough. She translated softly. Fragment 1 preserves claim. Fragment 2 preserves inventory. Fragment 3 preserves names of profit. Professor Vale went still. Mr. Reed whispered, 3 fragments? Eleanor's face drained of color. Victor gripped the back of the chair. Amara looked up. This manuscript is only the first part. The ballroom was silent. Then Clara Benson, still holding the clipboard, spoke in a voice that did not shake. Mr. Harrington, where are the other 2? Part 5. The Reckoning. Legacy and Tay. Mr. Harrington, Clara Benson repeated, her pen still pressed to the clipboard. Where are the other 2 fragments? No one in the ballroom breathed normally after that. Not Victor, not Eleanor, not Professor Vale, not Amara Collins, who stood beside the study copy with her father's torn notebook page folded inside her apron pocket, and an $80,000 check in her hand that somehow felt less important than a single faded line of ink. Fragment 1 preserves claim. Fragment 2 preserves inventory. Fragment 3 preserves names of profit. The words had changed the room. Before that moment, the manuscript was embarrassing for Victor. After that moment, it became dangerous. Victor slowly released the back of the chair. I do not have the other fragments. His voice was controlled, too controlled. Professor Vale looked at him over the rim of his glasses. Do you know where they are? Victor's jaw tightened. This is absurd. Mr. Reed opened the Moreau and Klein acquisition folder again. His hands were steadier now, as if procedure had given him a spine. The lot description mentioned possible companion material, he said. Victor turned toward him sharply. No, it mentioned rumor. Mr. Reed swallowed. It mentioned 2 missing related fragments referenced in a 1952 private catalog. The notation was included in the extended provenance appendix. Eleanor's eyes moved to Victor. You read that appendix? Victor did not answer quickly enough. That was the answer. Dana Pierce, the journalist, wrote something in her notebook. Victor saw it. I said this is off the record. Dana looked up. You invited me here under the subject line, Private Stewardship of Cultural Memory. Your assistant sent written permission for event notes and non-flash photography. Victor's face hardened. That was before my employee began making accusations. Amara lifted her eyes. I have not accused you of anything. No, Professor Vale said quietly. The document did that. Everything froze. Victor looked at him with something close to hatred. At 8:29 p.m., Malcolm Donnelly, the Harrington family attorney, arrived through the side entrance in a rain-dark coat, carrying a leather folder and the expression of a man who had been called away from dinner for a problem rich people thought money could silence. Clara met him at the service arch. Mr. Donnelly, the incident began at approximately 7:42. Camera 2 has full audio. Written notes are here. Moreau and Klein handler present. Professor Vale present. Journalist present. Mrs. Harrington present. Donnelly looked at the room, then at Victor, then at Amara. What exactly happened? Victor answered first. A staff member gave an unauthorized interpretation of a manuscript. Eleanor's cane struck the floor once. No. The word cut through him. Donnelly turned to her. Eleanor stood straight despite the tremor in her hand. My son publicly mocked Miss Amara Collins and offered her 1 month of his salary if she translated the manuscript. She did. Professor Vale verified the reading as meaningful. The reading suggests the Bellevere fragment may be evidence in a concealed ownership claim related to my mother's family. It also suggests a Harrington ancestor may have witnessed the transfer. Donnelly's face changed with every sentence. By the end, he was no longer looking like a family lawyer. He was looking like a man calculating exposure. He turned to Victor. Did Moreau and Klein send a provenance inquiry before tonight's event? Victor looked away. Donnelly's voice lowered. Victor? Yes. When? This afternoon. What time? Victor said nothing. Mr. Reed checked his tablet. Initial inquiry forwarded at 2:17 p.m. Subject line, Preliminary Bellevere Claim Registry Match, Lot 417B. Follow-up marked Urgent at 7:59 p.m. Donnelly closed his eyes briefly. Was the insurer notified? Victor did not answer. Donnelly opened his eyes. Was the trust notified? Still nothing. Eleanor whispered, You used my family's loss as decoration. Victor turned toward her. I did not know that. You knew there was a claim, a possible claim, and that was enough to stop the party? she said, "but not enough to stop your pride." The words landed cleanly. No shouting, no cruelty. Just a mother looking at the man her son had become. Donnelly stepped toward the display case. "No one touches the original. Mr. Reed, seal the case for transfer. Professor Vale, I need a written preliminary statement before midnight. Miss Collins." He stopped. For the first time, he looked at Amara not as staff, but as a necessary witness. "Miss Collins, I need your notes preserved exactly as written."
Amara placed the place card on the tray Clara held out. Clara covered it with a clean linen napkin, not to hide it, but to protect it. Donnelly nodded. "Good. Clara, scan your event notes. Send copies to me, Mrs. Harrington, and the trust compliance account. Do not send anything only to Victor." Victor's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" Donnelly looked at him. "Victor, at this moment, you are a potential conflict party." The room went silent again. Potential conflict party. 3 words that sounded like glass cracking. Victor Harrington, who had begun the night as owner, host, collector, and judge, was now being treated as a risk in his own ballroom. At 9:04 p.m., Moreau and Klein's provenance director joined by encrypted video call from London. Her name was Dr. Elise Marceau, and her face appeared on Mr. Reed's tablet beneath a pale office light. She reviewed the claim number, NK-417B-PROV. She requested still images of the study copy. She requested Clara's timestamp. She requested Professor Vale's statement. Then she asked, "Who identified the custody cipher?" The room looked at Amara. Amara's hands felt suddenly cold. Professor Vale answered, "Miss Amara Collins." Dr. Marceau looked into the camera. "Academic affiliation?" Victor made a faint sound. Amara heard it. So did Eleanor. Professor Vale said, "Former Columbia linguistics scholar. Her thesis work directly concerns hybrid mercantile custody ciphers. Her father, Samuel Collins, corresponded with me in 2013 about the Bellavere pattern. I have archived records supporting that." Dr. Marceau's expression sharpened. "Samuel Collins?" Amara looked up. "You know his name?" Dr. Marceau nodded slowly. "There is a Collins memorandum referenced in a European private archive index. We were never able to locate the author." Amara pressed her fingers to her mouth. For the second time that evening, her father stepped out of obscurity. Not as a hobbyist, not as a poor librarian with unusual interests, as a researcher whose work had been waiting for someone powerful to stop ignoring it. Dr. Marceau continued, "Based on what I am hearing, the item must be removed from promotional use immediately. Moreau and Klein will suspend final warranty confirmation pending full review. Mr. Harrington, you are instructed not to represent Clear Title until the investigation is complete." Victor's face darkened. "And if I refuse?" Donnelly answered before Dr. Marceau could. "Then you risk the warranty, trust exposure, insurance complications, and possible civil claim if Bellavere descent is verified." Victor said nothing. Because at last, the language of consequences was one he understood. By 10:12 p.m., the party was over. Not officially. No one announced it, but the guests left in small groups, quieter than they had arrived. Some avoided Amara's eyes. Some looked at Victor with the fascinated discomfort of people who had enjoyed the humiliation until it became evidence. Malcolm Price left without finishing his champagne. Dana Pierce left with a notebook full of truth and no need to exaggerate. In the service corridor, Clara found Amara standing alone beside the staff lockers. The ballroom noise had faded. The silver trays had been stacked. The roses still looked perfect, because flowers do not understand shame. Amara held the check in one hand, in the other the torn page from her father's notebook. For the first time all night, her shoulders shook. Not loudly,
not in a way guests would have seen, but enough. Clara stopped a few feet away. I should have stopped him sooner. Amara wiped her cheek quickly. You tried? No, Clara said. I calculated. Amara looked at her. Clara's voice remained controlled, but her eyes were wet. I knew what he was doing. I knew it before he made the offer. I have known for years how he uses people when rooms give him permission. I told myself protecting staff quietly was enough. She looked toward the ballroom. It was not enough. Amara did not rush to forgive her. That was important. Forgiveness given too quickly can become another way of comforting the people who watched. So she only said, Tonight, you kept writing. Clara nodded once. Tomorrow, I will keep speaking. At 11:38 p.m., after the manuscript was sealed for secure morning transfer, Victor found Amara in the West Library. She had returned there because her hands needed something familiar. She was replacing the French volumes Victor had pushed out of order that morning. Balzac, where Balzac belonged. Hugo, beside Hugo. Latin folios aligned by date, not color. Victor stood in the doorway. For once, he did not enter as if the room owed him space. Miss Collins? She continued placing the book carefully on the shelf. He heard the pause before she answered. Yes, Mr. Harrington. I was wrong. She looked at him then, not impressed, not softened, waiting. Victor swallowed. I was wrong before you translated anything. That is what my mother told me. Amara said nothing. He continued. I thought your work gave me permission to make assumptions about your mind. I thought money made the room mine. I thought laughter meant agreement. The library was quiet, except for rain against the window. Amara held one book against her chest. You are not the first person to think a uniform is a ceiling. Victor looked down. No. And you are not the first person to apologize after discovering the person you insulted was useful. That struck him. He deserved it. I do not know how to fix that. You cannot fix tonight by making me exceptional, Amara said. That is still the same mistake. Victor looked confused. She stepped closer, still holding the book. The problem was not that you mocked a maid who happened to know ancient languages. The problem was that you believed mocking a maid would have been acceptable if she did not. Victor's face changed. There it was, the real lesson. Not intelligence as revenge, dignity before proof. Amara placed the book on the shelf. You want to start somewhere? Yes. Learn the names of every person who works in this house. Not because they might embarrass you one day, not because they might be useful, because they are people before they are useful. Victor nodded slowly. And the money? I earned it. Yes, he said, you did. No, Amara corrected. I earned respect before I translated anything. The money is only the part you can count. Victor had no answer. That was the first honest thing about him all night. The next morning, at 8 a.m., the Bellavere custodial fragment left Harrington House in a sealed climate case under courier escort to the New Haven Center for Manuscript Conservation. At 10:15 a.m., Eleanor Harrington issued a public statement through the family trust. The Harrington Family Trust acknowledges that newly identified evidence may link Lot 417B, known as the Bellavere custodial fragment, to a historical ownership claim. Promotional use of the item has been suspended. An independent review will be conducted by qualified scholars and provenance specialists. The Trust also recognizes Miss Amara Collins for her preliminary translation work and the late Samuel Collins for prior research relevant to the inquiry. Victor hated the statement. Eleanor signed it anyway. By Monday, the consequences had multiplied. Harrington Capital's communications office canceled Victor's planned interview on cultural stewardship. Moreau and Klein opened a formal provenance investigation. The insurer froze full coverage pending review. The Harrington Family Trust Board removed Victor from sole approval authority over historical acquisitions. A staff conduct audit began at Harrington House. Clara Benson submitted a 14-page memorandum documenting patterns of verbal humiliation, class-based dismissiveness, and staff fear of retaliation. The memo included dates, names, incidents, not only Amara's. A kitchen assistant Victor had called replaceable in front of guests. A driver blamed for a schedule Victor himself changed. A server fired after correcting a wine placement Victor had ordered incorrectly. Silence had kept records. Now, the records spoke. 2 weeks later, Harrington House adopted new household policies. All staff were to be addressed by name. Public reprimands were prohibited. Staff complaints would go to an outside employment mediator, not Victor's office. Event protocols involving staff participation required consent and written approval. And Clara Benson, who had spent years managing crises without authority, was promoted to Director of Household Operations, with independent reporting access to Eleanor and the Trust Board. When Clara told Amara, she tried to keep her voice professional. Then she cried anyway. Amara hugged her, not because everything was forgiven, because something had changed. Professor Vale did not wait. 3 days after the party, he contacted Dr. Lena Moritz at Columbia. Subject: urgent. Amara Collins / Bellavere cipher / Samuel Collins. Notes: Amara received the email while sitting beside her mother's rehabilitation bed at St. Agnes. Her mother, Evelyn Collins, had one hand resting over Amara's. The hospital television played without sound. Jamal sat in the corner doing homework he was pretending to understand. Amara opened the email. Dr. Moritz had written, "Amara, Professor Vale has shared enough for me to say this clearly. Your work was not lost. It was interrupted. If you are willing, Columbia would like to discuss reinstatement options, emergency funding, and a research appointment connected to the Bellavere Review. Your father's notes may be historically significant. So are yours." Amara read it twice, then a third time. Her mother watched her face. "What is it?" Amara tried to speak, could not. Jamal stood. "Good news?" Amara laughed once, but it broke into tears. "I think Dad was right." Her mother squeezed her hand weakly. He usually was. 6 months later, Amara Collins stood inside a Columbia lecture hall wearing a navy dress, not a uniform, with her father's notebook displayed on the screen behind her. The room was full. Students, scholars, reporters, provenance researchers. Professor Vale sat in the front row. Dr. Lena Moritz sat beside him. Eleanor Harrington was there too, older and smaller in the auditorium chair, but smiling with both hands folded over her cane. Victor sat in the back. He had not asked for a front row seat. That mattered. On the screen was the title of Amara's presentation, Hybrid Mercantile Custody Ciphers and the Bellavere Fragment, Hidden Ownership Records in Wartime Transfer Documents. Below the title was another line, with reference to the Samuel Collins papers. Amara looked at her father's name for one quiet second before beginning. She spoke about false Latin, terminal marks, custody symbols, hidden descent claims.
She spoke about how history often survives not in grand declarations, but in margins, ledgers, servant notes, shipping records, and the places powerful people do not think to read. Then she paused. The hall became still. "A manuscript does not lose value because the powerful cannot read it," she said. "A person does not lose value because the powerful refuse to see them." No one moved. Amara continued. "The night I first read the Bellavere fragment, I was not treated with respect because I was human. I was given attention only after I became useful. That is not respect. That is recognition arriving late." Eleanor lowered her eyes. Victor did too. Amara looked out across the room. My father used to say that dead languages are only waiting for patient listeners. I think people are the same. Some voices are not silent. They have simply been ignored for so long that the world mistakes its own neglect for their absence. The applause began softly, then grew, then rose until the hall stood. Amara did not smile at first. She looked at her father's notebook on the screen. Then she let herself breathe. After the lecture, Victor waited near the back while others spoke to her. When the crowd thinned, he approached. Miss Collins, Mr. Harrington, I know an apology does not become better because it is repeated. No, she said, it becomes better when behavior changes. He nodded. The trust board approved the staff mediator for another 3 years. Clara sent me the first quarterly report yesterday. I read every name. Amara studied him. Good, and the other fragments. Fragment 2 was found in Lisbon, Amara said. Fragment 3 is still missing. Victor absorbed that. The names of prophet. Yes, if Harrington is on it. Then the record should say so. He nodded slowly. Months earlier, that answer would have made him defensive. Now he only looked tired. Then let the record say so. It was not redemption, not fully, but it was movement. And sometimes, movement is the first honest thing a proud person does. That evening, Amara returned to her Bridgeport apartment one last time before moving closer to campus. The laundromat downstairs was still closed. The radiator still hissed. The kitchen table still had scratches from years of bills, meals, homework, and fear. But now the old Latin dictionary sat beside a new Columbia ID. Amara Collins, Research Fellow, Department of Linguistics. She placed her expired student card beside it. Then she opened Samuel Collins's notebook to the first blank page. For years, she had carried pieces of his work like grief. Now she picked up a pen and continued it. At the top, she wrote, "Some languages are not dead." She paused, then added, "They are only waiting for someone ignored long enough to understand silence." The rain tapped against the window. Her phone buzzed. This time, it was not the hospital. It was Jamal. "You better be writing history." Amara smiled. Then she typed back, "We are." And that is the part Victor Harrington never understood when he laughed in that ballroom. Money can buy a manuscript. It can buy a glass case. It can buy a chandelier, a mansion, a guest list, a professor's attendance, and a room full of people willing to laugh before they understand the joke. But money cannot buy wisdom. It cannot buy dignity. It cannot turn ownership into understanding. And it cannot make a person valuable only after the powerful finally discover what they know. That night, Victor thought he was challenging a maid. He thought her uniform was the limit of her story. He thought his salary was so large that offering it would make her humiliation entertaining. But Amara Collins did not win by shouting. She did not win by revenge. She won by standing still in a room designed to shrink her and letting knowledge speak in a language arrogance could not read. So if this story reminded you of someone who is judged by their job, their clothes, their silence, their accent, their bank account, or the place life forced them to stand, write their name in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to remember that dignity does not begin when others recognize it. And subscribe for more stories where the overlooked carry the truth, the arrogant learn too late, and justice begins the moment one person refuses to look away. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is not empty. Sometimes they are carrying a whole world. And sometimes all it takes is one sentence, one page, one forgotten name in the margins for the whole room to finally go silent.